Welcome, boys and girls, to Wednesday for our regular session with Miss Anna. And this is a session that Katie and I haven't done in a long time. I haven't done it at all, and Katie hasn't done it in a long time, but it really makes sense to do a session like this during the summer when we have forest fires happening all around us, especially to those of us in Ontario and British Columbia, where forest fires are often prevalent and can cause a lot of damage. So Miss Anna's going to talk a lot about that. Hi, Faye and Wes. Glad that you guys are here. We just showed Wes's killer bee picture to Miss Anna. So that was awesome. And your picture too, Faye. So thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Miss Anna, because I know that you always have a ton to share with us. So over to you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to hear that before this program, you actually got a little bit more background information about forest fires and some of the people who are working all around the world, not just in Canada and here in the States where I live, but all across the world in order to prevent forest fires. Let's see, it wasn't doing that. Let me see if I can leave my...
Okay, that was my fault, Hannah. Sorry, I just fixed it.
Thank you. All right, so we are talking a little bit about forest fires today, and we're specifically going to talk about some people that we call burn bosses. This lesson is a pretty fun and interesting one, but if we haven't met so far, of course, we're going to start with just a brief introduction to who I am, why I'm talking to you, and where I work. So I work at a place called the Michigan Science Center, of course, located just a little south of where you all live here in the state of Michigan. This is my map of Michigan here. And if you've joined me for frostology before, you know we love to talk about Michigan and how we call it the Mitten State. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about Michigan today, but we are going to do a little bit of map reading a little bit later on in our program, all about burn bosses. Now, this program was created from the Create for STEM's Fire Ecology Unit because we're going to be addressing some interesting questions. We've gotten funding for this program, and we've gotten videos and supplemental instruction from the Nature Conservancy. So if after this program, you find yourself wanting to learn more about how forest fires are an important part of our Earth's ecosystem, not always a bad thing, not always a good thing, but if you are finding yourself needing more information, the Nature Conservancy is a great place for you to get some more information. There are resources there, there are activities, and there are experts that you can actually speak to as well. We call this lesson Burn Boss Training. Now, you met someone who is a pilot, I believe, earlier today, if you were present for that session here on Connected North at Home. But does anyone know what a burn boss is? If you have an answer, or you have an idea of what a burn boss might be, go ahead and tell me in the chat. Does anyone have any idea what a burn boss does, what their job is? Go ahead, let me know in the chat. Take a moment to think about that question. There is a burn boss here on the slide. I won't tell you which one is the burn boss. Maybe it's this butterfly, maybe it's this turtle, maybe it's this guy right here. One of these living things is a burn boss. So tell me what you think a burn boss does, maybe based on what they are wearing, what you think this person might do for their job. And these people work for the Nature Conservancy. So burn bosses work for the Nature Conservancy. And I see Faye and Wes said they are firemen. And that's a great answer. So they clearly work with fire, right? Look at what this friend right here is wearing. Got all sorts of protective equipment on, because if you have been around for any of my sessions where we've talked about fire before, we know that fire can be a bit hazardous, right? It can be very dangerous. And so, of course, these burn bosses wear all sorts of heavy duty equipment. They have special tools, things to keep them safe and things for them to use, but they are a very special type of firefighter. They put out fires, that's absolutely correct, Faye and Wes. So they help to put out fires, but something else very interesting that burn bosses do is that they actually purposely start fires, which might sound a little bit counterintuitive. Why would they start fires if another part of their job is to put them out? but we are going to talk about what burn bosses do and how important they are to protecting some of our Earth's landscapes. Now, of course, since we're talking about burn boss training and we're talking about fire today, let's do a quick review of the fire triangle. If you've been present for Kaboom History, we go in detail into all of these parts of the fire triangle. I know there is a recording on Connected North at Home site if you'd like to go ahead and watch that program sometime when you're not in another session. We do a deep dive into all three things that a fire needs in order to burn. These three things are fuel, heat, and oxygen. If we're missing one of these pieces from the fire triangle, of course, our fire would go out. And that's something that burn bosses can use to their advantage when they are trying to fight these forest fires. So we are going to do an example of a combustion reaction, or we are going to combine fuel, heat, and oxygen in order to start a fire right here inside my studio. Now, question for you all. If you have some background knowledge on this, whether it's from one of my sessions or from maybe some research you've done on your own, hopefully safely, can anyone name me what is a good example of a fuel? What kind of things make for great fuels? Fuels are the things that are actually burning in a fire, right? We'll of course need a source of heat, which we can provide using a variety of sources. Oxygen is in the air all around us, but what types of things make for good fuels for fire? Tell me in the chat. Think about, if you've been around for Kaboom History, what are some of the things we used as fuel? Or if you're thinking about forest fires as they relate to this session today, what kinds of things fuel forest fires? Ooh, let's see. Someone said gasoline. That's a fantastic fuel, right? We put gasoline and oil in combustion engines. We know oil is highly flammable, which is why it's very dangerous to have around a fire because it burns very, very hot. Wood is another fantastic example of a fuel, right? Trees, plants, wood, paper. Let's see, cardboard. Yeah, all of leaves. All of these things are fantastic examples of fuel. Now, we are going to use something else as a fuel today, one of these things that we haven't named so far, but you might be familiar with this being a good example of a fuel. We are actually going to burn something called isopropyl alcohol. And isopropyl alcohol, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with if we are practicing good hand hygiene. This is one of the main ingredients in hand sanitizer. So do not put hand sanitizer anywhere near a flame because this stuff is very, very, very flammable. We are going to do this reaction safely, of course, and we are going to ignite some of our fuel, this isopropyl alcohol, and we are going to create what we like to call a fire tornado here inside my studio today. So I've got a few components that we need to add. So I have an empty trash can here. And what I've done is I've just cut a small piece of sponge and placed it down inside this Pyrex dish. Now, we are going to light our fire inside the Pyrex dish because this type of glass is meant to withstand a rapid change in temperature. So even if this glass gets really, really hot very quickly, it's not going to shatter. But not all glass is borosilicate or Pyrex. So of course, never try this at home. Never try anything relating to fire at home because we know fire can be very, very dangerous. We'll go ahead and I'm going to place, well, let's soak my sponge first because it'll be easier to soak it out here on the table than before we put it inside the trash can. So I'm going to soak my sponge here, just let it absorb our fuel. Close my lid and then put my fuel source far from where my combustion reaction is going to take place. Let's go ahead and set that down here inside the trash can. That's our fuel. Heat I will be providing using just a regular lighter. And then, of course, we said oxygen is in the air all around us. We can double check that if we all take a deep breath together. All right, hopefully no one has passed out from lack of oxygen. So we know oxygen is in the air all around us. We have all three parts of our fire triangle, but I see a good point coming up in the chat. Is it like me to just light a fire without talking about safety first? No. If you know me, we know that when we're working with fire, right, being safe is our #1 priority. And so before we light the fire, we should probably talk about a little bit of fire safety. Now, I'm missing a couple important things that I need in order to safely light a fire. I'm already wearing my lab coat. This is here to protect me. This is what we call flame retardant, and it's actually going to burn away instead of melting, which is an important quality of fabrics. If you are working near fire, is that you would rather than burn and disappear, rather than wearing something like plastic or polyester that might melt and then get stuck on your skin. I also see that I should be wearing, of course, some gloves. So I have a glove here for the hand I'm going to be placing near the fire. And then, of course, my most important piece, I just set them off to the side. My safety glasses, right? Awesome. Now, there's also one more thing, not something I should wear, but something I should have if we're working with fire. What kind of thing should I have here, just in case our fire or combustion reaction were to get out of control? Of course, we're not planning on that happening, right? We are planning to be safe. There is a fire alarm in this building, and I will tell you guys a quick story about that as soon as we do this reaction. There is a fire alarm. I promise that's on hand. But of course, I also have my fire extinguisher. Never out of reach, always here just in case I might need it. I've never had to use it making our fire tornado here inside the studio or doing any of my other demonstrations, but scientists are always prepared. Now, that wasn't just to bore you, but of course, it's always important to note that we are performing fire experiments safely, that we're never just going into it without being extra super safe, especially when we're doing this for an audience at home. So now that I've got my very cumbersome glove on, we'll go ahead and I'm going to ignite our fuel, which is now soaked completely through that sponge. Once we light this fire, I'm going to start rotating this platform here. Let me turn off my virtual background just to make sure we can all see the reaction while it's going on. Once I start to rotate the platform and start spinning our combustion reaction, I want you to watch what happens to the flame. You'll be able to very easily see something very cool happening. All right, here we go. Let's go ahead and light our dish. All right, our sponge is on fire. I'll add one more piece of equipment here, just a top part of our dish, giving our fire a larger column or area to travel through. And now let's go ahead and rotate the dish. What do you notice? Something very cool starts to happen, right? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this hand, might keep my gloved hand down here, and we're going to start carefully deconstructing our reaction here. And as long as there's fuel, heat, and oxygen inside that dish, right, our combustion reaction is going to keep burning. If I want to put it out right, I need to remove one of those things from our fire triangle, and the easiest one to remove is, of course, our oxygen. If I take our Pyrex dish or lid, place it on top of our fire, I've snuffed it out, or I've suffocated this fire. Since I'm not giving it any more oxygen to go on with its reaction, the fire has now gone out. But of course, that dish inside is very, very hot. And so I'm just going to scoot this off to the side, leave it there to cool down while we go through the rest of our program. Now, when I spun the platform, what happened? I see some answers in the chat. The flame started to get higher and higher and higher. It actually created a vortex, just like Catherine told us. Now, we know that when things get warm, they start to rise. That's an important principle here on Earth. As things heat up, the molecules expand, they become less dense, and so they'll actually rise up through the air or through the water or through any other medium that they are a part of. The same thing happened here inside our dish, but I added something very, very important. By spinning the platform, added something that we call angular momentum, which is a property of anything that is rotating. You and I have angular momentum if we are spinning on a platform or on our own 2 feet. Maybe if you've ever seen someone like a figure skater who has been spinning, right, we'll notice that as they spin or as they pull their arms in towards their body, they begin to spin faster and faster. The same thing happened with our flame. We noticed that not only did it get taller, it also got much narrower as the speed of rotation started to increase. Angular momentum is a very powerful tool, and especially when we're talking about fire, it can be very, very dangerous. Now, fire tornadoes don't just happen here inside my studio, they actually happen out in nature as well, because you don't actually need someone rotating a platform to create this sort of angular momentum. We have another type of fire tornado that we use here at the Science Center, and I have a video to show you. And I told you I would tell you a quick story about the fire alarm. Now, on Monday, I was doing our Kaboom Mystery program here inside the studio, and we're having some work done in the building. And so the HVAC system is turned off right now. And so there's not a whole lot of airflow moving through our building because we're having some work done and we can't have the air conditioning on. So not only is it very, very hot, the air is not circulating very well or very quickly, and I accidentally set off the fire alarm on Monday. Because of that, I'm trying to be a little bit careful about what types of demonstrations I do here in the studio, but I still want to show you our bigger version of our fire tornado. And this one does not require the use of a rotating platform. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. Let's see if it comes up. There it is. All right. So this is a video, and I apologize, it was taken on my phone in the vertical format instead of the horizontal format. But I actually created this fire tornado that we could take on the road and use for programs. And this one just relies on that principle of moving or rotating air, just like what happens out in nature. What you see down on the bottom or sitting here on the floor in our facilities shop is two pieces of plastic that are wrapped in a circle, but there are two cuts in the side. So there are two openings for oxygen or air to move in or rush into this column. Down in the bottom, I have something very similar to what we just saw. I have a dish that has a sponge soaked with some isopropyl alcohol, and we are going to recreate this experiment, and let's watch how it works. All right, so you'll see me come into the shot, and you'll notice that I, of course, need to pull my hair back just like it is now, because we definitely don't want to dangle our fire over any, or our hair over any sort of open flame. We are lighting our fire tornado, and we can see that the flame starts off as a pretty large, pretty wide plate full of fire down on the floor. But as I add a chimney, this very narrow column for the air to start moving through, we recreate that same principle that we saw with the moving dish, and really the same principle that we see with figure skaters too. As we created that narrower opening for our fire to travel through, you can see that the flame starts to rotate much more quickly and much taller. So as they move into a narrower opening, just like a figure skater pulls their arms in towards their body, the speed of rotation increases, creating what we call a fire tornado right there inside the dish. All right. So apologies that we can't do that one here in the studio, but we do have to make sure we're being safe. And I think that my operations team would be pretty mad if I started another false alarm with our fire alarm system today. All right, so now that we understand fire, I have a demonstration for us to do. Now, some of these materials were listed as a part of your backpack. And so we are going to investigate that property of angular momentum by creating a toy that we like to call a button flywheel. This works off the same principle of angular momentum, and it's a pretty fun toy to also demonstrate the conversion of potential to kinetic energy, or stored energy to movement energy. For this one, you'll need a piece of string, and you either need one of these jumbo craft buttons, and I'll zoom in and give you a closer look at that. Either one of these jumbo craft buttons, or I said that you could also just use a piece of cardboard. Now, I basically just cut the cardboard before the program and turned it into a jumbo button of my own. So I know that not everyone has these big buttons lying around their house. I know I certainly do not. We just buy them here at the Science Center to make these button flywheels. But either of these is going to work perfectly fine for this demonstration. Now, what I did before the program is I also took a little piece of tape and I wrapped it around the end of my string, just so I can use it almost like a sewing needle to thread it through these holes. It just makes the process a little bit easier. And all you want to do is thread your string through two opposite holes. So not two that are right next to each other, but two that are across from each other. That way we can kind of distribute the weight evenly across our string. So
and boys, girls, it's completely okay if you don't have the materials right with you. It's something that you can go back, and now that you've seen what the materials look like, you can go back and maybe watch the recording again at this part.
Exactly. These I know get recorded and posted on Connected North's website, so definitely you can check back on this. I will also send Molly and Katie an email that has the activity instructions on it. And so if you're looking for a little bit more of a step-by-step with some written instructions, I have that for you as well. And I will send that to you right after our program today. So all I did is I threaded it through my button so that I can put my hands on either side of our button flywheel, just like this. And let me zoom back out. All right, so we are going to use that principle of angular momentum in order to create this toy. So you can see that I've put my 4 fingers on either side through the string, leaving my thumbs out. It just makes it a little bit easier to hold it. And you're basically going to hold it like this, like with 2 big thumbs up, and you're going to let the button loop over itself as many times as you can. While you do this, you'll actually start to feel some tension building up in the string as it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. What we're doing is we are creating potential or stored energy. And now, as we let the button start to coil and uncoil, and you'll be able to see this better if I zoom back in, now that we can kind of see the motion here. So we're going to coil it up, store that potential energy, coil it as many times as you can, and then you're going to start pulling open and close your hands. Now, as we do this, right, that angular momentum is pulling on the string. It's causing it to rotate quickly. And as we convert our potential to kinetic energy over and over and over, the button starts to spin really, really quickly. I'll give you one final note about safety. If you create one of these button flywheels at home, either right now or later on after the program, do not put this near your hair. I've seen one person accidentally dangle their hair over their button flywheel, and we had to give them a little bit of a haircut because it got pretty tangled up in the string. So if you create one of these at home, they are really fun. It creates kind of this really cool buzzing noise. And so the kids who actually invented these in the early 1800s used to call them buzz saws, which is a pretty fitting name. But you could literally do this forever and ever and ever until your arms get tired. Once you are tired, you just need to let your button completely unwind and then set it down so you don't get it tangled. And then you can use it again later on in the program, or later on if you want to. All right, so that is one activity that you can try after this program, and it will show you up close just how quickly the angular momentum of these fire tornadoes can build up. But let's get back to our program and talking a little bit more about forest fires. Now, we're going to address an interesting phenomena from out in nature today. There is this type of tree called the jack pine tree, and it has pine cone seeds that only open under extreme heat, like in a fire. When the seeds open, a new pine tree can be planted and start to grow, just like any other seed. Now, if you also saw in the backpack, you might have noticed that we asked you to go outside, if you're able, and collect some pine cones. And I also know that Molly and Katie mailed out some pine cones to people who live in areas where pine trees aren't quite native to where you live, and that is totally okay. You might not have them now, but this is an activity that you can try a little bit later. So we'll get to that activity in just a moment, but if you did go out and collect your pine cones, we're going to start an activity with those in just a moment. So this jack pine tree is also where a very specific bird has its nest. This bird is called the Kirtland's warbler, and it is native to Michigan. And actually, not too long ago, this bird was on the brink of extinction. There were almost no Kirtland's warblers left. But these Kirtland warblers have to create their nest in those jack pine trees. But they need a specific age of tree as well. So Kirtland's warblers will only make their nest in a young jack pine tree. If the tree is too short or too young, or if it's too large because it's too old, the branches of the tree won't be the right height for the Kirtland's warblers to feel safe making their nests there. So these two living things have a very interesting relationship. In review, the jack pine tree needs fire in order to open up its pine cones, release the seeds, and to grow more trees. And the Kirtland's warbler needs to have a young jack pine tree in order to build its nest and raise baby birds. Now, if you went out and you collected some pine cones, and you also have a cup of water handy, like we noted in your backpack materials list. Again, if you don't have these materials now, come back, watch the recording, and you can try this activity yourself. So I've got those materials right here on my table. I've got just a cup of water. Any cup of water or container of water will be perfectly fine for this as long as it's big enough to completely cover your pine cone. All you need to do is take your pine cone and place it down in the water. And you'll notice that if I try to set it on top of the water, it does actually float. We want to completely submerge it. And so really the best way to get your pine cone completely submerged is to flip it upside down on its end. And now almost the entire thing is submerged in the water. And this experiment is very, very easy because we're just going to leave it here. And we're going to check back on this pine cone throughout the program. So don't worry, I haven't forgotten about it. This is the entire experimental setup. And we're going to come back and talk about this as we go through our program and learn a little bit more about forest fires. Now, I'm not sure if this commercial is as popular in Canada as it is here in the United States. Maybe you're familiar with this question up top. Is anyone familiar with this phrase, who can prevent forest fires? Now, there's a pretty famous commercial or public service announcement that comes with this commercial here. And we're going to watch this really quickly. It's just a couple seconds long. And I see some answers starting to come in. So you guys must know this one too. But this is a public service announcement from a person or a character called Smokey the Bear. Well, let me make sure I don't think I shared my computer sound. There we go. Now I did. And let's go ahead and watch this together.
A forest is many things. Shady places where you can camp.
Good places for picnics, too.
Yes, and a home for wildlife.
All kinds of wildlife.
Timberland for lumber harvest. And grazing land so there'll be meat for dinner.
And milk in the morning.
Watershed to make sure you'll get water when you turn the tap on at home.
A forest is sure a lot of things.
Yes, but let a little fire get started. Catch on, destroy, and your forest is nothing.
Nothing for anybody.
You have so many reasons to protect your forests. Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
So this commercial has been pretty popular, and there's been many iterations of this commercial over the last 50 or so years. So the answer is, right, only you can prevent forest fires. We all know that forest fires can be extremely dangerous. I'm sure that if you live in a region where forest fires are active, or when they are especially active this time of year in the summer, you may have seen videos of forest fires, or maybe you've even seen one yourself. They are very dangerous, very harmful to places where people live. But of course, that poses the question, right? Why do so many plants and animals depend on fires then? So of course, we know that plants and animals like the Kirtland's warbler and the jack pine tree need fire in order to continue living in their ecosystem. But humans don't like fires at all. So Amanda from the Nature Conservancy is here to talk to us a little bit more about the history behind how humans started putting out forest fires and some of the problems with that.
You've been learning a lot about fuel as energy and how it feeds fires, especially the ones today that are more severe than ever. Thousands of years ago, fires played a natural role in the ecosystems of North America. Some of them were ignited by lightning, and some of them were lit by people intentionally. In both cases, they benefited the natural environment. In 1910, there were a series of severe wildfires in the northern Rocky Mountains that resulted in many people losing their lives and an entire town burning to the ground. This scared a lot of people, and so they decided that they would go ahead and put fires out instead of allowing them to burn or intentionally lighting them. 100 years later, this has resulted in the accumulation of a lot of fuel. That fuel is an energy source. And so when a fire starts in the forest, where all of that fuel is located, it burns with greater intensity, much more hot than it ever did in the past.
All right, so we know that for hundreds of years, just like Amanda told us, people understood the benefits of forest fires. And it's actually only recently that we started putting out forest fires or preventing them from happening at all because of their threats to humans. Now, even as long ago as 1908, the Native Americans were actually purposely setting fires because they knew of their benefits. They knew what they could do for the environment, right? So we have to understand something called the fire cycle as well to understand how forest fires can actually be a good thing for our planet. And we need forest fires in order to propagate or grow more of certain species. Now, of course, without fire, right, dense trees will grow way too tall and they'll block all the sunlight from some of the lower growing plants. These trees will get larger and larger and larger because they are the only ones getting enough sunlight to keep growing. Now, also, the older trees get, some of them will start to die, which causes a lot more fire hazards. Because if there's more trees, especially more dead trees in a forest, right, fires are more likely to start and they'll have more fuel. They'll burn hotter and be more dangerous, just like it tells us up here on the top. But of course, if we were to start a fire, or if a fire were to start in nature, thanks to something like a lightning strike or due to friction, new growth is actually allowed to grow. Once we clear some of those taller, older trees, we can start a whole new cycle of life within an ecosystem. New growth produces a variety of food for certain animals, and as the forest grows, it provides a home and food for all these new and changing kinds of wildlife. As the forest gets older, right, our fire cycle almost starts over. As the forest gets older and older, those trees get taller and taller, but of course that also might prevent some of those low-growing food sources, like berries and other fruits and vegetables that grow at a much lower level than some of these older, taller trees. And therefore, the fire cycle would need to repeat itself in order to continue providing life within this ecosystem. So tell me what you think. This is just an opinion question. There is no right or wrong answer to this. Are fires mostly a hazard or mostly a benefit? And I see some awesome answers starting to come in the chat about what we think about forest fires and what they can do for the environment. Charlie said it replenishes the forest, and that's exactly right. Just like we saw in that last picture, it replenishes food sources and different types of plants and animal life as well. It also helps to fertilize the soil. That's exactly right. And it seems like all of us are on about the same page. Oh, and a very good answer from Charlie and Bentley that it is definitely a benefit to the forest and the plants and animals that call the forest home. But you're right, it's harmful to humans, right? And so we need to find a balance between these two things Of course, we know that some of the cons of forest fires are mainly related to humans, that they can be damaging to our homes, they can be damaging to human life, they could contribute to soil erosion where we build our towns and cities. And so in order to safely have forest fires, right, we need to create controlled burns. And we need to understand why these are necessary. So let me do a quick check back on my pine cone here and tell me if you notice anything. You may not be able to tell just yet, but we'll keep checking in on this pine cone. Make a mental note of what it looks like. I could even pull a fresh pine cone out so we can make a comparison here. So I'll just leave this one right here on the table. Might not look too different just yet, but let's watch this. And we'll keep checking back on this throughout the program. Now, let's take a look at a fast version of, or let's play a game first, and then we'll check back on our pine cone one more time. So we are going to play a game. And this game is all about different plant adaptations that make them suited to survive a forest fire. So let's take a look back at our PowerPoint here. And we are going to play a game. And each of these different plant structures have been adapted between different species of plants to either better survive or not survive a forest fire. So let's see, let's start. I'll choose the categories here, but you can all weigh in on the answer. Let's go ahead and try the bark category. So we are going to see bark from two different types of trees. And what I want you to tell me in the chat is which one is going to survive the forest fire? Which one is better adapted to survive the forest fire? Let's give this one a try. Which one do you think, based on these two photos, do you think the thick bark or the thin bark is better adapted or more likely to survive a burn? Tell me in the chat, is it the thick bark or the thin bark? Yeah, lots of great answers coming in. Definitely the thick bark. The left photo is going to be more likely to survive a burn, right? It has a thicker layer of protection from the heat and some of the damaging effects of the forest fire. The bark also helps it to retain its moisture, so it's like a thick outer shell, almost like our hissing cockroaches that we met last year, right? You can think of it like an exoskeleton. The bark is there to protect the inside of the tree where all of its water transport takes place, bringing water from the roots up to the leaves and the green parts of the tree. So the thicker bark is definitely more likely to survive the burn. We mentioned roots, so let's try the roots category next. Of these two root systems, which one is more likely to survive a burn? Is it the one with the large root system? Or is it the one with the shallow root system? So you can either say large or small, or deep or shallow. Which one is more likely to survive a burn? Yes, we are unanimously choosing so far that the large or deeper root system is going to be more likely to survive the burn. That's exactly right. The deeper the roots go, right, the more moisture they can collect. So even if the forest or the ecosystem gets very, very hot because of the burn, right, some of the water near the surface of the soil might begin to evaporate. But if a plant has a deep root system, like this one over here on the left, it is going to be more likely to continue pulling up water or moisture from the soil. Whereas the one with the shallow root system, right, once the water on the surface of the soil evaporates or gets much too hot, this root system would probably burn up entirely. This plant would have no more water, and so this one would be more likely to die in a burn where the deep root system would survive. Good answers, everybody. Let's do one question from each of our last two categories. Let's first talk about leaves. Which leaf is more likely to survive a burn? And you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, these aren't leaves. But these structures are the adapted version of leaves that most pine trees would have. And so we've got a pine tree over here and a maple leaf over here. So tell me, what do you think? Which one is more likely to survive a burn? Some mixed responses here. And so we've got some votes for the pine tree, or the one on the left, and a couple for maple, but I think someone changed their mind too. It is definitely the pine tree, right? So the pine tree, since they have these very narrow, very adapted plant structures, right, they are specifically suited to go through a drought. And so they can live in hot environments, they can survive longer without water, and they can withstand the heat. And we've also talked about some other types of adaptations of pine trees, which is that experiment that we're doing here on the table as well. So let's try one more category here. All right, now you may have chosen a different type of pine cone than I have here on my table, and that is okay, because there are two main types of pine cones. There are what we call serotinous pine cones and regular or non-serotinous pine cones. The pine cone that I have here is serotinous. And you'll see that they are coated with this kind of oily coating. And this is normally what they look like when they're healthy and alive. And you might notice that they don't really look a whole lot like the ones that I have on my table. Maybe it's the same color, but now that it is not attached to a living tree, it's opened up and it's lost some of its waxy coating as it's dehydrated. So we might not know the answer to this one yet, but based on what you think, tell me in the chat, which one will survive a burn? Is it the serotinous cone or the regular cone? Let's see. So, let's see. Faye and Wesley said they have a regular cone, and that's good. That's good, because then we can do this test in two different ways. And so we might get some different results from our experiment. So the serotinous cones are more likely to survive a burn. And it's for an interesting reason. These serotinous cones actually open up under extreme heat or dehydration, which is why the pine cone I have on my table looks so different than the one that was attached to that tree. If we come back and look at it, my serotinous pine cone, now that it's gone without water for a very long time, it has actually opened up, which is this pine cone's way of being able to spread its seeds. So the word survive has kind of an interesting connotation when it comes to that question, right? So even though this pine cone might not survive the burn, even though the tree itself might die and be burned up or lost in the flames, you are more likely to get a new pine tree after this burn. And so the species of plant is going to survive because under extreme heat or dehydration, the pine cone will open up and release its seed to start growing more trees. Our pine cone in the water, you might now start to notice, is starting to look a little different, especially up at the top of the pine cone. You might notice that those openings are actually starting to close. As we rehydrate the pine cone, we are actually starting to close that pine cone back up, and it's starting to look more like the one we saw attached to the tree. Now, I have a time-lapse video of this experiment because this experiment takes about 20 minutes to go all the way to completion. And we're going to let the pine cone keep soaking in water throughout the last 15 minutes or so of our program here. But let's take a look at a video of this process happening very, very quickly. So this happened over 27 minutes, this video is telling us, but they're just speeding it up to make it happen very, very quickly. So would you look at that? After sitting in the water, right, as we rehydrated that pine cone, it went from being open, like we see here on the table, to almost entirely closed. So while these trees are hydrated, they actually protect their seeds inside. These plants have adapted to survive best or to make new plants once there is a forest fire, because this plant knows then there will be space for those new trees to grow. So if these pine cones close up in water, let's take a look at a fast or sped up version of what happens to these pine cones if we were to put them in the toaster oven. So if we were to simulate a forest fire by making these cones very, very hot, and you'll see a thermometer in there, which is going to tell us just how hot this oven is going to get over this sped up video. So 20 times the normal speed, but it would take us much too long to watch this go all the way to completion. But watch as the temperature rises inside the toaster oven, our serratinous pine cone begins to open. This pine cone thinks there is a forest fire. As the temperature approaches 400 degrees, right? That would be a good indication in nature that it's not just hot outside, but that there is a forest fire raging, and that these plants know now is the time to release my seeds, now that there is space for new species or new trees to grow. And that's pretty similar to what we see here on the table. Now, I also have one that I put down in the water just before our program. And you can see that this one I set in there maybe about 20 minutes prior to the other. And this one is almost entirely closed up. They all started off looking like this. Over time, right, they slowly close, because being moist or having access to this much water is a good indication to this plant that this is not the time to release the seeds and to try starting a new growth of trees. How big are the seeds? That's a great question. Each one of these little petals, I'll call them, coming off the pine cone have a seed attached to the base. And so the goal would be that as these start to burn, right, they become more brittle, and one of these could actually break off. See, I might not get one to break off completely, but each of these would break off, be carried through the wind, and hopefully plant an entirely new pine tree. Great question. All right, so now that we've gone through our game, let's meet a couple burn bosses. Now, these two women work for the Nature Conservancy as burn bosses in order to purposely set forest fires or fires in their region in order to protect the local plants and animals. We heard from one of them just a few minutes ago, but we're going to meet another of these burn bosses. Her name is Tony, and Tony is going to tell us about her job at the Nature Conservancy.
Hi, my name is Tony Aguilar, and I work for the Nature Conservancy in Minnesota. One of the cool things about my job is I get to help protect species and their habitat. You guys are going to help me protect the Blanding's turtle in southeast Minnesota. One of the things you guys will have to learn how to do is how to read a map accurately, because the Blanding's turtle goes from the wetland where they hibernate. They bury themselves into the mud, hang out there through the winter with a low, reduced heart rate, and then in the spring they come out, they search for food, they mate, and then the females will cross over to the sand prairies and utilize the dunes to lay their eggs. We use maps pretty much daily on the ground to help us find and navigate throughout the preserve, and sand dunes are an easy feature to identify. Can you guys find the sand dunes on the map?
All right, so before we get to the map reading section of our activity, we'll do that. Let's also talk to Amanda again, and we'll let Amanda tell us about the species that she's protecting. So Tony is protecting the Blanding's turtle, and Amanda is here to protect an entirely different type of species.
Hello, my name is Amanda. I work for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. I'm the fire manager and the burn boss. I'm really excited to be working with you on this project looking at conserving the habitat for the Fender's blue butterfly. Now let's take a look at our maps. You're looking at the Willow Creek Preserve, which is located in Eugene, Oregon. There is a population of the rare Fender's blue butterfly that lives on the preserve. If you look at the map and locate Bailey Hill Road, and then look to the west of that or to the right of the road as you look at it, I'd like you to tell me what you see there.
Okay, so now that we've got a brief introduction about what types of animals our two friends are protecting, this is an image of the Blandings turtle, very, very cute. And this is the animal that Tony is working to protect by setting controlled burns. And this is the Weaver Dunes where they live. And so, of course, they have these signs for turtle crossing because these animals are endangered and we are trying to protect them as much as possible, which means not only setting controlled burns, but also not hitting them with cars either. That could also be bad. And then Amanda, like we said, is protecting the Fender's blue butterfly, also a very beautiful animal, which lives in Pigeon, Butte, Oregon. Now, let's take a look at those maps that they mentioned. This is a map of Pigeon, Butte, Oregon. And Amanda noted that it's important, or Tony did, I think, that it's really important as a burn boss to be able to read a map. And so burn bosses will look at satellite images like the one we see right here in combination with maps in order to determine where they are going to set their controlled burn. Now, Pigeon Butte, Oregon doesn't have a whole lot of human life around it. We can see a couple important features which we can annotate on the map here. Let me get my annotation tools. It says that if we're looking for the forest, we would mark those with blue shapes. And so let me get a stamp ready. So if we're looking for the forest, right, we can clearly see it over here on our, oh, that's not blue. Let's do this. So we can clearly see it in the satellite image, right? But it's important that these burn bosses know how to read a map as well. So we've got blue dots noting the forest up there. And of course, we can translate that down here to this map as well. We also need to know where we might not want to set our burn, right? And of course, we would not want to plan our controlled burn where we have the road. And so it's important to note where the road is because that's where our human life is most likely to be. And then, of course, the prairie is noted as an important part of this as well. So normally we could have all of us work together on this. You could have these maps, but it's a little difficult working here in this kind of setting. But of course, our prairie are these lowlands where we are not working with those dunes. So let's clear this map and let's talk about Tony's map next, because Tony works in, get rid of that. Tony works in the Weaver Dunes, Minnesota, and you'll notice that this is a very different map than the one that Pigeon Butte looked like. This one, there is definitely human structures, right? There are homes and towns and roads and all sorts of things that if we were to set a controlled burn, we would need to worry about where those things are so that we are able to protect them. So if we were looking for our homes, right, our homes, let me get my circle tool here. Our homes are these little rectangles. And so we might have homes or farms, and it's important for the burn bosses to be aware of where they cannot let their controlled burn get to, right? So that we aren't damaging any human life while we're working to protect these animals. Now, Tony mentioned that the migration of these turtles is also important, so they need to understand where their forest is located. Of course, if we were looking on both maps, right, we can see the trees up here. That would also be up here where our green patches of map is. And then, of course, the wetlands are those areas where we have lots of water. So we'll do one last color here, and we see the wetlands where our turtles would actually be breeding, and those are very important. Now, the reason that we need to set controlled fires in the Weaver Dunes is because there are obstacles for these turtles in order for them to get there. And we can actually hear one last time from Tony about the actual reason why she has to set these controlled burns and why forest fires are beneficial in protecting these Blandings turtles.
The Blandings turtle is a pretty cool species. It starts off in the wetlands in the winter, hibernating, where it decreases its heart rate, and then once it comes out of hibernation, once the temperature warms up, it hunts for species to fill its belly, as well as finding a mate for reproduction. Once the females are ready, then they come over to our sand prairies to lay their eggs for the nesting season. And then they do travel back into the wetland. And then the little baby turtles, they hatch sometimes in August, October, and then they'll join the other turtles in the wetland after they make their migration. One other really cool species on the dunes is the hognose snake. And it's just one of 4 species out there that are really cool snakes. But this hognose snake will dig, because its nose is upturned, which is pretty unique within snakes, as well as it has a strong desire to live. And what I mean by that is predation is high in this area. And so if an animal comes on and wants to eat it, it'll sometimes pretend it's a cobra and flatten its neck out. Sometimes it'll pretend like it has a rattle on its tail, so it'll act like a rattlesnake. Other times, it'll pretend like it's dead and roll over. And so if you pick up the snake, it keeps rolling over, pretending it's dead and curling up in a little swirl. And then other times, last-ditch effort, it's pretended that it's a cobra, it's pretended it's a rattlesnake, it's pretended it's dead. Now it vomits and poops all over itself, so it just doesn't taste good for those predators.
All right, so the Blandings turtle, which we see right here, we need these controlled fires so that we can eliminate some of the obstacles that would prevent these turtles from getting to their nesting site, to where they live for most parts in the year, but also because these animals rely on temperature in order to determine the sex of their offspring. Now, like a lot of reptiles, the temperature that the eggs are incubated at are actually what determines whether the eggs hatch as a male or a female turtle. If we have too much grass growing, the eggs will start to incubate at too high or too low of temperatures, which could result in having way too many females or way too many male turtles. We need a good mix of both, right, in order for these turtles to continue reproducing and continue living in their ecosystem. So now that we understand some of the benefits of forest fires, right, we'll do one last check here on our pine cone. We can see that this one is now almost entirely closed. Those leaves or petals are definitely starting to close up as we simulate a very, very damp, moist, low temperature environment, right? Started off looking like this one. And so if you have pine cones at home, you can easily recreate this experiment. If you have a regular pine cone instead of a non-serotinous pine cone, you might notice opposite effects. You might notice that your regular pine cone might actually start to open up in water, because some of those are designed to spread their seed when they are working in a very, very damp or moist environment, when there's lots of water available to those trees. And so try this one out at home. Take a picture, can definitely share it with Molly and Katie. If you have questions about it, you can reach out to me as well. And I know I am now over my time. And like Molly said, I have a lot to talk about, and so we will end here. But of course, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to type them in the chat. Let's see, oh, Faye and Wes said that their regular pine cone is closing too, right? So even though it might not be this specific species of pine cones, other pine cones can have interesting effects when we change the environment they live in. That's fantastic.
Well, Miss Anna, this was amazing. I'm so glad that I finally got to see this session, because I just think it's so important to still have that message that I had when I was a little girl going camping across Canada. Only you can prevent forest fires, and also seeing the amazing ways that scientists and ecologists are using fire to keep populations safe. And I learned so much. I really, between Craig this morning and you today, I learned so much about ecology and being safe with fire. So thank you so, so much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So boys and girls, we're finished for our adventures today, which is so early because we had an early start. But tomorrow we're going to be meeting with Corrine at Royal Botanical Gardens. And in the afternoon, we're going to meet with the glacier diver who dives inside glaciers way up north. So that's really awesome. And she wrote a book, that is just so incredible. And we've seen her before, but she's got new stories for us too, for the new people, or for the people who've seen her before. So thanks, Miss Anna. We'll see all the adventurers tomorrow. Maybe go out and collect some pine cones and see if you can reproduce to see if you have a gelatinous or non-gelatinous pine cone. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Have fun. Bye, everyone. Have a safe day.